Hey everyone! Microsoft certification is an ever-changing, nebulous thing, right? As technologies are released, as technologies are updated, obviously the Microsoft certification programs need to keep pace with the needed skills in the industry. Now, I've got Paul Schnackenburg back on the show today, and Paul is a Microsoft certified trainer, and between himself and I, we've seen many different iterations of Microsoft certification over the years. So I thought it'd be fun to have Paul on, and we'll talk about the current state of Microsoft certification in 2025, whether we like it, what we would like to see changed, and more importantly, what you need to know in order to get certified in the current Microsoft ecosystem. So all that and lots more on today's episode of SysAdmin Weekly. Welcome back for another episode of SysAdmin Weekly, the show that is by sysadmins for sysadmins and, well, really dedicated to all of those tireless folks working in the IT trenches day in and day out, thanklessly, to keep our digital world spinning, right? I am your host, Andy Serwich, and I've got Paul Schnackenburg back with me today. How's it going, Paul?
I'm good, Andy. How are you?
Doing good, doing good. Hey, I appreciate you coming back to share your knowledge with us. I think today's going to be a good one. We're talking about certification today, and I know you're a Microsoft certified trainer, so you're my guy for this topic. So appreciate you being here as always, my friend.
No, that's fine. I have been a Microsoft certified trainer since 2006, I think. So with a gap in between there at some point, I think. But anyway, I've been an MCT for a really long time.
Gotcha. Well, that's a nice segue, actually. I know this is your second time on the show. Just in case folks are watching or listening that may not know who you are, can you give us a quick introduction of yourself?
Sure. I'm originally from Sweden. I moved to Australia in 1997, started my own business in 98, so I run a small MSP here on the Sunshine Coast of Australia. I am a Microsoft certified trainer, and I was a non-Microsoft certified trainer before I was a Microsoft certified trainer. And I've been doing technology nearly all my career, and fairly Microsoft focused. And I write articles as well.
You do write articles. You write a lot of articles. So very cool. Well, thanks, Paul. I appreciate that. And before we get to our main topic, of course, we've got our, I need to name this like a segment. It's the, I don't know, the what are we working on, a news segment of the show. That's terrible. I need to come up with something better for that. That's a TBD item there. But anyway, as we do on this show every week, starting 2 weeks ago, is each of us will talk about one techie thing we've been working on, and we will also talk about one IT pro related news item that really caught our eye from the week of the recording. So as for this recording, we are recording this my evening of May 9th. For Paul, it is the next day in Australia. So it's the 10th for you, I believe.
Yep.
And so I guess I will start with the news items, and I'll selfishly go first here, Paul. And, the big thing that caught my eye, and, those folks that listen to the show probably know that I work in cybersecurity, right, in my day job. So the cybersecurity news is always very top of mind for me. But this one really stood out, and back on the 24th of April, Bleeping Computer reported on this, and the headline really caught my eye, and you'll understand why when I read it out here, and that is, hackers abuse OAuth 2.0 workflows to hijack Microsoft 365 accounts. So, of course, we have all the problems with reverse proxy toolkits in order to siphon off M365 credentials, right? But now we throw in this particular attack, and really what they do is they're abusing. There's Russian threat actors in this case. They're abusing kind of that OAuth process, and essentially what they do is they created a pretext of, targeting Ukrainian officials, EU officials, posing as, country officials, that they wanted to have a conversation about current political issues happening in Ukraine and the EU, which there's a lot of, right? So the attacker sends a video call invite, right? And they send instructions to join the call, and then they send a URL for verification, right? And so what this verification email does is it directs the target to an online version of VS Code that simply displays a token, a string inside of the browser, and the attacker, via text, via voice, whatever, is trying to get that token. That way they can use it to authenticate via OAuth to the target's M365 environment. And the thing about this token is it's authentication that bypasses the user account. So even if the user changed their password, that access persists. And if I remember correctly, it persists for about 60 days, which is more than enough time for the threat actor to get up to all kinds of mischief, right? So what I'll do is I'll put a link to that in the show notes below, so you can check that out. But definitely another one to keep an eye on. So,
yep, absolutely.
Oh, what's your eye-catching news item of the week?
Okay, so I want to make sure we don't get political here, but I do want to sort of point everybody to the ongoing Signal Gate / telemessage gate. If you haven't heard, the Secretary of Defense in the US, Pete Hegseth, has been, and others in the senior people in the administration have been using, we thought they were using Signal, but they actually have been using telemessage, which comes from an Israeli company, which is now defunct. They've shut down as soon as all this attention was put upon them. So the thing to realize here is that when you have, so there's two short messages I want to include here. The first one is, when you have a secure messaging platform like Signal, that is fantastic for consumers, because the message between you and me, Andy, if we're talking on Signal, is very secure. Right? There's no, Signal can't read it, and people along the wire can't read it. But that is not the risk that you're defending against when you're handling, state secrets, because your endpoint is a consumer device. It's an iPhone or an Android, which is, definitely compromisable, if that's a word. So that's the big risk here, right? And that any of these endpoints, and especially if you have a group chat, imagine you have a group chat with 10 people, now you have 10 possible endpoints that can be compromised. Right. And the consensus from people who know what they're talking about when it comes to spycraft and state-sponsored spycraft, that sort of thing, is that it's very likely that some of those devices are compromised. And once you have one device compromised, you have access to the whole group chat. So it is a huge issue. Now, the risk I see with it is that I spend time with my small business clients, and I know many, many other listeners to this podcast would be doing the same in their work, wherever they work, or for their clients, if they're an MSP or something like that. They're trying to convince them to be more aware of data security, and they're trying to convince them to use data security measures to protect their sensitive data, and they are not protecting state secrets in most cases. And it gets to be very, very hard if you have, like, the boss of the company says, well, everybody else can do MFA, but I can't be bothered because it takes me 5 seconds extra. Or I'm not going to bother protecting my data, but you guys have to follow the procedures. And that's sort of what we're seeing here at the highest level of government, right? Like, complete just ignoring any kind of rules and regulations and just going for it willy-nilly, right? So that to me is the big news here. Oh, and I will throw in a quick bonus one as well. Three of the major retailers in the UK have been hacked by ransomware in the last week and a half, including
have.
Marks and Spencer, lost 500 million euros of their share or their value due to the hack. And they also, according to sources, did not even have an incident response plan. And they are in trouble. So,
Oh, how can you be that large and not have an incident response? You know what? I don't want to know.
no, exactly. You don't want to know it. But apparently, like, people are sleeping in the office and working, 24-hour days to try to get back up and running, and online shopping isn't working, and stores aren't working properly. That's terrible.
I feel for the team that has to get all that stuff back online and running, because that is not an easy job. I mean, that's like, when you're talking about an incident of that scale, that's like weeks of running in crisis mode, and that is just exhausting when you're in the trenches,
And you will know that there is at least one, if not many, of the sysadmins in that organization that have been saying for years, hey, we have a problem here. This isn't fit for purpose. We're going to run into trouble if we get attacked. And somewhere above them, there was a CFO or somebody else who went, well, according to the spreadsheet, there's not dollars for that. So you just have to make do with what you've got. And I would like to see that CFO going, where am I going to find 500 million euros now? You know what I mean? Like, that's,
it's unfortunate. So, well,
it is.
I'll include the links to all of those news items in the show notes below, folks, so you can check them out. In terms of, cool, fancy, geeky tech stuff that we are working on currently, I have actually been prepping for an upcoming webinar where I am going to be playing a hacker who is taking advantage of poorly configured OneDrive for Business and SharePoint Online permissions and settings, because we all know that those are very... Wrapping your hands around the permissions for SharePoint Online and OneDrive for Business is a difficult problem. And so I've been prepping for that. And in order to do that, I'm having to essentially populate a tenant with mock data. And of course, I can use a Microsoft developer account for that. And it comes with like 18 users. And there is some mock data, but there's not a lot. And so I'm having to create a little bit more, and I'm having to, configure some permissions and share settings, how they might look like after it's been a business that's been established for 10, 15 years, right? And I have learned more about Microsoft Graph in the last week than I ever set out to. So to the point to where I'm starting to feel a little bit like a developer. I'm not a developer by any stretch of the imagination, but good Lord. Graph. It's great, but man, it is rough to work with sometimes. Anyway, how about you, Paul? What's your big techie, nerdy project as of late?
It's going to be a little one, but I now I do know who to call when I have graph issues, because I'm not a graph guy, so and even less of a developer than you are, so that works for me. I'm really just going to round off what I talked about in the last episode that we recorded, swapping my education client over from the radio-based internet connection they've had. They're sort of in a bit of a rural area, and we've now swapped them over to the national broadband network here in Australia. For most people in sort of suburban areas, you get a fiber connection to your house if you're lucky, or the old copper cable. But up there, they don't get either of those, but they can now get essentially what's a 5G or an LTE connection with a dish on the roof. So the plan they're paying for is 400 megabit down and 40 megabit up. I did some speed tests yesterday after getting it installed and working, and they're getting a bit over 200 down and a bit over 12, 15 up. So so certainly better than what they had. They had less than half, a third of that sort of thing. So that's kind of cool.
Very good.
Installation.
It's always nice running that speed test for the first time after spinning up a new WAN interface, and I don't know, there's something satisfying about that, but
It is.
I digress. Well, what do you think, Paul? Should we get into our main topic? Certification. It's certainly more. It's a more liked topic than what myself and our good buddy Eric talked about an episode or two ago. We were talking about Microsoft licensing, which is everybody's favorite topic, right? Certification's a little bit more fun. So anyway, so knowing that you're a Microsoft certified trainer, Paul, I thought it would be a kind of a good segue into the topic to maybe explain a little bit more about what exactly an MCT does and essentially why you are, highly qualified to talk about the topic of certification, right? So I'll let you run with that one.
Sure. Okay. So I took my first Microsoft certification in 1997. It was Windows NT Workstation 4.0. I have no idea what the code was. And that certification exam was the only one that I have attended a course for. I actually sat in a classroom and listened to another trainer for about, I don't know what, 4 days maybe, 3 or 4 days. Teach us all about it so that we could pass the exam. And he was, of course, a Microsoft certified trainer back in Sweden, back in those days. Since then, I've done everything self-taught. So the point of a Microsoft certified trainer is they are meant to have two components, a high level of technical skill and a high level of ability to educate others skill. And this is sort of speaks to the fact that very often you will find people who are experts in a particular area and they're really, really good at, I don't know, Hyper-V or VMware or Cisco networking, whatever. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're any good at teaching that to anybody else. You know what I mean? Like they understand it, but it's a completely different skill set to then translate the technology understanding and deep skills that you have in a particular area so that you can convey it to somebody else.
Right.
So the role of the MCT has changed a lot. And we could obviously go on a tangent here, but I'll try to avoid that. There's a lot of resentment, I think, in the MCT community overall, based on the changes Microsoft has made over the last few years. So originally when I was an MCT, you could only teach the official course curriculum, and as an MCT or a training center, you had access to that official course curriculum, and nobody else did. Right? So you had that created by Microsoft training material on, I don't know what, like Windows Server 2008 or something. And then you had that material and you could prepare on it. And you had labs that you downloaded and ran on servers in a classroom. And then students came in and they learned from that material. A few years ago, Microsoft took away the official curriculum material, more or less. And it's all on Learn now. So it's all public. Like everybody can go to the learn.microsoft.com site, and essentially that's the same material. So if I'm teaching a course today, I can literally say to the students, this is the course material, go here. Now I do have PowerPoints. There aren't PowerPoints available on the Learn site, but apart from that, it's all the same material. The second thing to think about is you got to think about certification and this has also changed over the last few decades. And this is not just Microsoft, but they're the biggest, and we're talking from a point of an MCT here, but any of the other, like Cisco and VMware and all the others, they have their certification programs as well. There's the benefit for the SysAdmin or the person who's learning and getting a certification. And the benefit, of course, is that you validate your technical skills on a particular product or an area or a role that you're performing. So that, and it's like an external, it's not just you saying on your CV that, oh yeah, I've been working with, Hyper-V for the last 10 years. It's actually validated by an external test. But so that means that you can put that on your CV and show others that you have these skills. Right. And one of the things it does, often you'll find somebody who says, oh yeah, I'm an expert on X, right? But then when you probe a bit deeper, you find out, yeah, they use X all the time. And in half of X, they're an amazing expert. But they don't use all of it, right? Because it's very few areas where you end up using all of it, right? So you're a Microsoft 365 admin, but you spend nearly all your time in Exchange Online and related areas, and you don't do a lot of SharePoint. Well, the point of a certification exam is to say, well, do you have the breadth of knowledge, right? You're not just an expert in one thing, but you have the breadth of knowledge. The other side, though, of certification is what does it mean to the companies you work for? So if you are a Microsoft partner or a Cisco or VMware or whatever partner, there has also always been a requirement that you have certain certifications, right? Because the point is that if you're a Microsoft partner and you're implementing Microsoft technologies, you need to have people who are skilled and understand those technologies. So they need to have the certifications. And if they have the certifications, you can then advance to different levels or specializations in the partner program. So there's sort of two sides to it, right? Like there's the people who hire people who are certified because they want them in their organization so that they can prove to others that they have the skilled people. And then there's the people themselves who want to prove to others that they have the skills. That was a long rant.
No, you know, it was long, but valuable, you know. So I think you've done a good job of, you know, highlighting what an MCT is, you know, the recent changes for MCTs, and you've kind of segued into the value that certification brings for a sysadmin and their career growth, right? And I mean, I don't think we're treading any new ground here when we say that, you know, certifications, they bring you more opportunities, make you more valuable to the marketplace. Plus just gives you, like you said, gives you that more broad overview of a given area. You know, so like I know that Microsoft has all the different knowledge domains. You know, they've got Azure, M365, aka modern work, right? Security, data and AI, lots of different areas, right? And so, I mean, to your point, you know, if I have an M365 certification, I'm not just the Exchange Online guy, right? I can kind of work into other areas of 365. And I think more importantly, and I don't think this gets talked about enough, is if I was just an Exchange Online administrator, there may be certain settings or best practices that I'm lacking because I don't understand the big picture, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I understand Exchange Online, but there's things in Entra or conditional access that I don't understand because I haven't looked into it, right? So I think that's the huge value of certification from my end. I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that before we move on to the current state of things.
No, there's one more thing I want to point out here, and that's really, really important because I've been teaching students, like I've taught students in classrooms pre-COVID for couple of decades, and often preparing them for exams. And it was, the question was always, because they didn't have a lot of money, so it was like, is it worth my investment to pay for sitting the exam, right? And then if I fail, I've got to pay again. But I'll tell you what, the confidence you get as a sysadmin from having passed an exam is really valuable, because even though you'll forget half of it, you know, that you studied for the exam within a few weeks perhaps, but you still have a basic understanding how the bits hang together. And that confidence is huge. I can't underline that more enough for any, especially any young person who's listening, right, who's starting in their career, right? You know, you'll find some people are like, oh, certification, it's all just a racket to earn money and I don't need it, and I do all this in my job, I just need to put it down in my CV and I can prove that I know all this stuff. Yeah, but there isn't an external validation that you have those skills, and you will not have them as broad as other things as you think you do. And I think that's the next one. Like if we go into the current state, the one thing I want to point out here as well, as somebody who would have sat well over 100 Microsoft certification exams by now, and I've got dozens and dozens of certifications, it has changed dramatically over the last 2 decades.
Yeah.
And the changes are twofold. they used to be very product focused. You'd get certified on Windows Server or Exchange Server, right? Or SharePoint Server. There were certifications for those individual products, all the way up to the master certification, which disappeared, over a decade ago now.
Long time ago, yep.
Yeah, but there was this amazing, for a few years, there was this amazing thing where you had to travel to the US. You had to attend courses for like 2 or 3 weeks at Microsoft headquarters, and you sat several exams, and if you passed all of those, you got to call yourself a master. That was and those people really had the technical in depth, because the people who came and told them were literally like the people deep in the product groups who were constructing these products. That has changed dramatically. The exams today are as hard as they've ever been, but not because they're as deep technical. It's because they're much broader.
Yep.
So they're not just focused on this one product, which then could include, 20 different areas in that one product, but it's covering such a wide area. And that's why I'm saying that if you get a Microsoft 365 certification, for example, there's a couple of different ones in there. If you have those, you really do have to cover the whole span of Microsoft 365. Like that's a big thing, right? So I think that's the challenge today, is covering all these different areas within an overall certification exam.
Definitely. And my gut tells me it's not a Microsoft specific change, but the industry as a whole as well, too, because what do I want to use an example? Security Plus is a good example, right? You look at the exam objectives for Security Plus, and I mean, there's like 30 or 40 different objective areas, you know? And so, I mean, you're going a mile wide and an inch deep on each of them, So, I mean, you have to know a lot of different things, at least at a 101, 201 level, right? And so I think that's the place that Microsoft has gone with this as well, too. So
the other thing to point out here is that we have switched, and that's sort of what I was describing when I didn't use that word. They have also changed from skills-based to role-based.
Yep.
This is another huge thing, and this happened a good 7-8 years ago. They started this movement.
Yep.
Where they rolled you over. They're trying to make the certification job role based. Right, like you are a Microsoft 365 administrator. These are the skills that we expect somebody with that role title to have. And it's funny because sometimes when I talk to people, especially people who are not so into certifications, they're like, oh yeah, Microsoft just makes that up. No. Actually, what happens is that Microsoft flies a bunch of experts in the industry, MCTs and non-MCTs, to Redmond for a week. They lock them in the room and they say, we're coming up with a new exam for, let me make up something else, Information Protection Administrator, right? So that's a job role. And then they lock these people in, and then they say, we want you to come out at the end of the week with a list of job tasks. These are the things we expect somebody in this job role to be able to do at this level. And then they put all those tasks together, and that's what then turns into the exam objectives, which then turns into the exam questions eventually that are going to test you.
Right.
So that's why it's now role-based, which also makes it broader, of course, because if you're say an on-premises administrator, like you've got to cover Hyper-V and Windows Server and DNS and Active Directory and everything, like you got to span all those things because that's part of your job role.
Yep. And I think that's a good move because, I mean, I remember the days where you had an Exchange admin and that's all that person did was manage Exchange, But now it's, sysadmins are expected to wear so many different hats, to your point with the on-premises example, right? Hyper-V, storage spaces direct, networking. They probably do something with a SAN or a NAS somewhere. I mean, there's just so many different hats that a sysadmin has to wear. The role-based naming convention kind of works, right? And so that all makes sense to me. I think the other thing that's changed along the same timelines was the certification levels, right? So it used to be we had the MCSA, the MCSC, and again, yes, the elusive MCM, the Microsoft Certified Master. But now we have fundamentals, associate, expert, and specialty. So,
Yeah, that's right.
which I think is more explanatory, right? I think it's simpler for somebody who doesn't know Microsoft certification from
Yeah.
front to back coming in. It's a lot simpler for them to look at that, right? The one thing I will say that drives me crazy are the exam names. The
Yeah.
exam names drive me crazy. AZ500, AZ204, MS900, right? I mean, I'm sure I'm sure there's a logic behind it. Whatever it is, I don't know what it is. But
Well,
when I'm scheduling an exam for whatever role-based, certification I've been working on, I'm like, okay, I have to go look and see what the test is because
yeah.
I have
Yes.
no idea what it is.
You do. And basically what you've got to do is you've got to look at the whatever the words are after the code, right? Because AZ204 or something, and then there is something after that that is,
Yep.
Azure Administrator or whatever. That's the title you need to look for because that's the job role.
Yep.
Right, so that's really what you're looking for there. I do want to mention while we're on this topic as well is applied skills. So the certification exams today are a combination of theory and practical knowledge. And there are some that actually have labs in them, right? So you're not just saying, you're creating a virtual machine, which size should you pick for this workload or something, and then it's a multiple choice question. It's actually, we want you to go and create a virtual machine, and then you get a set of instructions, and then you're in the Azure portal, and now you can go and create the virtual machine, and if you want to open up the command line, the Cloud Shell, either in CLI or PowerShell, you can do that and do the steps in there, or you can do it in the GUI, up to you, right? And then at the end, it measures, did you create a virtual machine? Was it in the right resource group? Did it have the right settings? Blah, 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 blah. And then it, evaluates you on your actual applied skills. There's a bit of that. But there is also the applied skills, not certifications, but things, credentials, right? So when you go in and look in your portal at your certifications, once you have one or two, there is the tab for certifications, and that's your certifications, and then there's applied skills, which again is an online exam but doesn't cost any money. So it's just a matter of learning a particular. So this is, I don't know, an applied skill could be deploy Microsoft Sentinel. So you got to show that you know how to create a Sentinel workspace and configure some connectors and basic stuff, and that's all applied skills. It's all hands-on.
And I think that goes along with the, the role-based strategy in that you have proved not only do you have the knowledge, but you've got the practical skills needed to fit this job role, right? And I think,
That's right.
if I'm a hiring manager, that's important to me, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely. That makes perfect sense. I will mention, in case people don't know, if you haven't done a Microsoft exam for a few years, it used to be that you always had to travel to a testing center to sit the exam. So you'd book it a few weeks ahead. And I always tell my students, book it. Don't say, I've done the course now and I'll book it when I'm ready, because life will happen and work will happen, and then you won't ever be ready and you will never book it. So book it, say, 3 weeks in the future, whatever, depending on what skill level you're at. Then you have a deadline, right? Now you got to study to get yourself ready for the exam at that time. Now,
that's fantastic advice.
it is, yeah. That's a long experience, because you'd meet these people, or they paid for a course and they did the whole course with me, and then you meet them a few months later. Oh, did you do the exam? No, the life happened. It's such a waste. Don't do that. But the other thing is, you can do them proctored now, so you don't actually have to travel to a testing center. You can actually do it in your home office. So you book it for an online proctored experience. Couple of notes there. They will tell you all the details, right? And you'll have to take photos of your room. You have to have a closed door so that you can be private in your office. And obviously, you can do this at your office as well. You don't have to do it at your home. And you'll need a laptop with a built-in, microphone and camera, because they're going to watch you the whole time. You can't have an external monitor connected to that laptop. It's got to be the built-in laptop screen. But if you do all of that, you don't have to travel anywhere or see anybody. You can just literally sit in front of the computer and do the exam at home.
I really like that option, and I'm somebody who, this may come as a surprise to people. I have exam anxiety. I hate taking exams. It drives me crazy. And so I used to be, very militant about I have to go to a test center. I have to go to a test center. And then one day, I don't know, like a year ago, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to try this proctored thing, right? And I have to say, it was a pretty positive experience. And I've done it a couple more times since then. My setup, I've got several monitors here, and I got my camera, Basically what I do for my desk here is I put a sheet over the extra monitors, right? And I take pictures of it. And I think I've only had one case where a proctor had to actually get on microphone with me. And they were like, hey, we need to check out this one thing. Can you turn your laptop around so we can look at, I don't know, the speakers on your desk or whatever, right? And so it works pretty well in my opinion. So I've been really happy with it personally.
Yeah, I think it's really, really good. And the commute is great because you literally just walk from one room to the other. So that's pretty good.
Right.
I've had lots of things. I had a sweatshirt on once because it was cold, and then I took it off because I was getting too hot. And she immediately came on and said, "What did you do?" And I said, "I just took my sweatshirt on. I just hung it over the back of the chair." I showed her. And the other time, literally in this office I'm in now, my dog pushed hard on the door and got the door open. So the door opens in the middle of the thing, and that's like a no-no. And I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. My dog pushed the door open, and I had to get him out and close the door again." So, but yeah. So that's good. Proctored exams. That's very important to know that they exist.
Definitely.
The next thing we're going to talk about is a recent development, and this is something that you might want to know if you end up in this situation. So, for a long time, Microsoft has had two things that have helped out for students learning, doing a course with an MCT, practicing to get ready for an exam. One thing has been Azure Pass. So you get a code from a Microsoft certified trainer or from a lab environment setup, and you put that code in, and that now gives you, $100, $120 of credit in Azure that you can then use on resources to create resources. So that's one great thing. And us as MCT got those, a small amount of those, so we could use it to prepare for, to deliver training, so we could do our own Azure stuff along the way. The other thing was you have the demo tenant for Microsoft 365, where you can sign up for a 30-day or a 60-day trial of a Microsoft 365 E5 generally tenant, and you get like 25 users created in there, test users or whatever. Now the Azure passes are gone. Like literally Microsoft has just taken them away, and it's a usual case of what we all learned in kindergarten. There is always somebody that spoils it for everybody else, right? There's one person or a few people who spoils it for everybody else.
Yeah.
So we can't have nice things. And we don't have the details, or I don't have the details. Obviously, Microsoft does, but I don't think it's come out in the community much. But I can sort of guess that people got hold of those Azure passes and they hammered them with Monero miners until they ran out the credits, for example. I can imagine, or hosted cyber attack infrastructure in Azure or something and try to use it that way. I can think of a few different things you could use to abuse that. And same things with demo tenants, the Microsoft 365 demo tenants. I think they are still available, but they're certainly restricted. They were used for sending spam. They were used for like Teams message attacks against other tenants and that sort of thing, right? So all of that's gone away. So it's really hard to deliver a course now with hands-on labs, because the lab providers are like, well, we can't give you Azure because we'd have to pay for it, right? So, and we don't really know where this is going to land. It's a recent development. So the last two courses I've taught, what the students get instead of a real lab where they can make mistakes and they have some credit and they can just follow instructions and do things. They literally get like a simulated lab where somebody has run through the lab instructions step by step, and now the student is literally just clicking on the screen step by step to see what the lab would have looked like if they'd followed the right step along the way. But there's no way for them to make a mistake, right? Because it's all just like a recording of a lab, not an actual lab.
Right. And plus, I think the big thing for me there is like, I feel like for IT, curiosity is a very important quality to have. And if I don't have a live lab environment, I can't be like, hey, what does this button do? Hey, what does that do? I can't break things and learn from that experience, right?
That's right. That's right. That's exactly it. And it is a terrible outcome. Now, obviously, I don't think that this is where we're going to land. I'm sure Microsoft is getting a lot of feedback from students saying,
I'm sure.
hey, I'd like a real lab, please, because this isn't a real lab. And as providers, that's the best we can do at this point, right? But obviously, I don't think that's going to last. But whatever it looks like in the other end, I don't know. I don't know exactly how Microsoft is going to come up with a solution to this, but they'll have to come up with something so that people can actually have a lab experience, because it's really important, right? Like, especially for something that moves so fast, like the cloud does, both Microsoft 365 and Azure and the security products. If you don't get to actually get some hands on and play around with it, like a lot of people learn in different ways. It was interesting you say you hate taking exams. And of course, I've heard that from a lot of students. And I love taking exams. Like
You're one of those people.
Yes, I'm one of those people, right? Like, and it's interesting because Microsoft has a psychometrician working for them. Her name is Liberty Munson. She's worked for them for like, I don't know, at least 15 years, if not longer. And so she does the psych statistics on each question in every beta exam before it becomes a real exam. And she says that in all her years of research, she has learned that it's just some people just like taking exams. They like the challenge of sitting there. And I do. And then there are people who hate it, and they see that in the statistics. So
You see, I'm one of those people that I have to get my hands on the product.
That's right.
I have always learned best by just tinkering. There's a lot of times where if I'm testing some new thing, I don't even look at the manual. I'm like, okay, let's spin this thing up and go, and I just kind of stumble through it and pick up stuff as I go. And when I come across something that's, okay, I'm not understanding this, let's get the manual out now and look through the documentation and fill in the gaps, right? And then, so coming back to the 365 and Azure Labs, that's rough for those people that maybe they're in between jobs and they're trying to skill up. They have limited resources. I mean, or heck, you just don't want to spend the money. You're trying to learn a new skill and now you're having a hard time getting access to the thing you're trying to learn, right? It's just, it's not a good situation. I really hope they come up with something to fit that mold. And like you said, it's a case of where one bad apple spoils the bunch, right? But
very, 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 very much so. Absolutely, very, very much so. The next thing we're going to look at is the annual renewal. So it used to be that you took a certification exam, then it was valid for 2 years, and the assumption was that after a couple of years, it was still on your transcript, but it wasn't sort of valid anymore because the technology had moved on.
Right.
Microsoft realized that wasn't really a fair way to do it. So now for all your certifications, after 6 months, you get, I think it's 6 months, 9 months, whatever. You get an email saying, hey, you can now renew your exam. And then you do a free exam. It's like a 25 odd questions, generally multiple choice in a web browser at home. And when you do that, you do it can be open book because you can have another browser open and look at things. So
right.
And you got to do those renewal exams every year to keep the certification current, and that sort of tests you on the new changes that has happened since the last one. So I do a lot of those because I have a lot of certifications.
I think that's a good move too, because like you said, I mean, especially with cloud technologies, that it moves so quickly. And The other thing I want to point out, you mentioned open book. I don't think
Mhm.
we've mentioned this yet,
Nope.
but when it comes to taking exams, exams are now open book in that you can have Microsoft Learn open within your testing environment.
That's
And
right.
so I really like this change because I have terrible memory. Just ask my wife. I can't even remember to pick up milk while I'm out and about. Anyway, uh, I think I feel like it really mimics the real world really well because if I'm, I don't know, spinning up new conditional access policies and I'm not 100% sure what this particular policy does, where am I going to go? I'm going to go look at Learn and get that information, right? And
Yep.
so I'm going to have that documentation in front of me when I'm in the real world doing those things. So I think it makes sense to have it in the exam as well too. So that's a good change in my opinion.
I think so too. A couple of tips there. Just be aware the only thing you can access is Learn.
Yep.
So you can't just go and browse, whatever forum on the web. It's only Microsoft Learn. And also, you can't rely on that in my experience. I mean, this is a recent change. It's only been a few months, or maybe a little bit longer, but not that long. Um, you can't rely on it because you won't have time. Like you
That's
can't say,
fact.
oh, well, then I need to study for the exam, right? I'm just going to look up every question on Learn, and you won't have that time, right?
No.
Like you need to know the material well enough that the things you look up are things that you wouldn't memorize anyway, like I don't know, VM sizes or something, those sorts of
Yeah.
things. Nobody's going to put that in their head because why? You'd go and look it up, right? But if you
I
don't
think
understand the basics of creating a VM in the first place, there's no way you're going to have time to go and look that up.
right, exactly. I think for me, the questions where it can really, I can really see it helping out is everybody runs into those questions where there's two answers that you can immediately set aside because they're just so
Yes.
blatantly wrong. But then there's two that it's like, I
Hmm.
could see it being that, but I could also see it being that in a certain, like, and you're trying, Learn to me is the tiebreaker in those situations,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I can see that. And overall, that's a good exam tip that I often give to my students. If there is a multiple choice question, don't be too quick to look for the right answer. Make sure you eliminate the wrong ones.
Yep.
Because once you've eliminated two or three wrong ones, then there might be one or two left. If there's only one left, well, then you're good. If there's two left, as you said, then you have a much narrower field to deal with. And of course, on a modern Microsoft exam, there'll be a lot more than just multiple choice questions.
Yep.
But that is a good one when you're dealing with multiple choice questions.
For sure. For sure. I think the only other thing I've got on my list before we kind of wrap things up is pricing. I feel like the exam pricing, they've increased it a tiny bit recently, but I feel
Yeah.
like overall, Microsoft is a lot better about exam pricing than some of the other vendors out there. I'm looking at you,
Yeah.
VMware. um, I, I don't know if VMware is still this way. Back when I was still a regular VMware administrator, um, you could go self-study for, VCP, get all the knowledge you needed, and go and sit and take the exam and pass. They wouldn't give you the cert until you ponied up for the training class that was required ahead of time. So the exam ended up being, I don't know what it was, $3,000-$4,000 because you were forced to pay for the
Oh, that's
training
terrible.
class, right?
That's terrible. Well, Microsoft has never done that. I
Nope.
think they're pretty good with the cost. And often, especially when you talk to students, they may not have a lot of money, and they say, "Oh, that's a lot of money for an exam." And it's like, no, actually, it's a good investment. I mean, as I said, I
Yeah.
must have taken hundreds of exams, and we do get a discount as an MCT. And generally, over the last decade, I almost always take beta exams. So this is before they're available for general release, and they're a lot cheaper. But even so, I must have invested thousands and thousands of dollars over the last couple of decades in my certifications. But the skills I have from that and the knowledge I have and my value as a consultant has, doubled or tripled from that. So
Oh,
like
easy.
that's a
Yep.
wise investment. Like that's think long term there. Don't get hung up on the cost.
For sure.
The last thing I'll wrap up with really is having a trainer versus not having a trainer. So you mentioned self-study and VMware penalizing you for it, which is pretty horrible. Obviously, it's not like that in the Microsoft world. They do not care where you get your skills. So there is absolutely nothing stopping you from saying, I want to learn and pass a certification exam on Microsoft 365. And you look up the exam, you look up the exam number, you look up the objective domains and all the skills that you need. I'll give you a link for the show notes as well for Intuned.net, which is Mark O'Shea, which is he's a guy here in Australia who does sort of exam preparation pages with links to the Learn documentation for each of the skills you need to learn. Nice. Anyway, you can do all of that. You can read through all the documentation, get yourself a demo tenant somehow, and work through it and get the practical skills, and then you can go and sit the exam. You don't need to have a trainer anywhere along that line if you don't want to, but that is hard. Like self-study like that, having that motivation, spending the hours it takes, and then doing a practice exam along the way, so you can get. Microsoft has official practice exams that has questions that are similar to the real ones, so you can prepare before you go and sit the real exam. But all of that is hard to do by yourself, right? So having a trainer in a classroom or in a virtual classroom to share their experience and answer questions along the way, rather than you having to try to look it up yourself, it is a huge benefit if you can afford it.
Right. It is a huge benefit, and I always err on the side of self-study because I tend to learn best at my own pace, and I'm usually tinkering in a lab at the same time, right? But there are definitely those situations where, okay, here are the exam objectives I'm working on. I can't find a Learn article for this particular exam objective or one that fits 100% perfectly. There's always those gaps, and it's useful to have a trainer for those particular situations for sure.
Yeah. And it also helps with the motivation because you're not caught up with having to motivate yourself to the whole thing. You have a trainer or a course, whether that's, a few days in a particular week or spread out. I really like the spread out learning because it gives you much better time to absorb it. So, like half a day for 6 weeks or something like that is much better than, 4 full days or 3 full days because it's a lot to absorb in that amount of time.
Makes sense. It's like the gym. The hardest part is showing up, right?
Yeah, you don't want to go to the gym for four full days and then not do anything else for the rest of the month. That is not a good plan, and it's sort of the same with your brain and learning.
Yeah, that's a good metaphor there. That there's something there for sure. So, well, Paul, I want to thank you for spending the time and sharing your knowledge here. It's always good having you, my friend, especially leveraging your MCT knowledge here. I think this has been a great episode.
Yeah, I hope so. We will have contact details, obviously, so if anybody has any questions around specifically Microsoft certification, but certifications in general, just reach out to us on the pod, and Andy will relay it to me, and I'll help you out.
Definitely. And if you want to get in contact with us here at the show, you can always email us at contact@sysadminweekly.com. In the process of figuring out some sort of public forum / Discord server / Slack server, I'm not sure which one yet. So we'll have a little bit more direct form of communication, but for now, contact@sysadminweekly.com will get you there. Other than that, what do you think, Paul? Should we wrap it up?
I think that's it.
Sounds good. Well, folks, as you know, we are a weekly podcast, and you can watch us here on YouTube. If you're seeing my smiling face, we are also available out on Spotify, Amazon, and Apple Podcasts. And with that, I suppose we'll let you go, get you back to your day, and appreciate you spending some time here with us. And we'll see you again next week for another episode of SysAdmin Weekly. Have a good one.